So, U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping will look to turn back the clock on increasingly complicated U.S. China relations. Now, will they be a breakthrough, though? Let's connect with the Voice of America correspondent Jessica Stone over in San Francisco. Hello there, Jessica. Great to have you back.
Good to be here.
Jessica, the two leaders are meeting for the first time in almost a year. Now, they have a lot to cover, from talks on Taiwan to escalating tech battles. What's on the agenda at the summit this time?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to point out that they've slated 4 hours of talk time between the two leaders. Last time they met face-to-face in Bali, Indonesia, they spoke for 3 hours face-to-face. And as you mentioned, this is the first time in almost a year that these two leaders of the two largest economies in the world are meeting face-to-face. They will do so about an hour's drive from here in San Francisco. They're going to be taking place, their talks, at a place called the Filoli Estate. And what's really key about the Filoli Estate is that it is a very beautiful mansion with grounds and lots of orchards and walking trails. And interestingly enough, one of the walking trails has a bridge upon it that crosses the San Andreas Fault. That is the fault that goes between the Pacific tectonic plate and the North American tectonic plate. So you can see some of the symbolism there in the place that they have chosen to do these talks. We may see some iconic photographs of those two leaders that might harken back even to the Obama-Xi Sunnyland Summit, which you remember also took place in California. So these two leaders will have face-to-face meetings. They'll have a working lunch. They'll have a stroll through the grounds. And there'll also be some smaller meetings with some of their officials, including National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And then, of course, Xi Jinping also has other meetings with the CEO summit, and will make some remarks later Wednesday evening to those CEOs who have gathered at least $40,000, in some cases, a plate, to hear him speak and see what's in it for the business community to invest in China.
Sure, the duration of the summit and the venue, it looks like they are really putting their efforts for that summit to happen. Now, is the U.S. then expecting the summit to be a game changer, maybe? What are Washington's hopes at the moment?
Well, they have really sought to tamp down high expectations. I've been covering U.S. China relations long enough to remember when we would get large outcomes from these meetings. We're talking about a major outcome that they want to achieve. It's just simply reopening the communications between the two militaries. That came up in the Chinese spy balloon incident earlier this year, which was ultimately shot down by U.S. forces. But Washington was very concerned that they couldn't get anybody from Beijing on the phone. They want to make sure that there is an opportunity, a line of communication, a hotline, if you will, between the two militaries to de-escalate anything that might happen, not only in the airspace above the United States, but of course in places like the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. So that's an important outcome they're looking for. As your reporter ahead of me mentioned, they're also looking for a deliverable on Iran. They would like the Chinese to use their close relationship with Tehran to get them to stop funding Hamas, and to certainly get them to de-escalate any involvement or any potential involvement of Hezbollah out of Lebanon. They don't want to have a second front open up in the Middle East, where they're already assisting the Israelis, of course, in the Gaza Strip. So that's a second major possible outcome that the U.S. is looking for. But again, in terms of trade and investment, in terms of business relations, we don't expect huge deliverables to come out of this summit. It would be sufficient in many people's eyes here in the United States to just get these two countries talking, especially at the leader level, because it's been 12 months, and that's a long time for the two largest economies not to be speaking at the leader level.
Right. Maybe it is time to really normalize their relations. Now, certainly, it's not just President Biden who's been wanting to make Xi-Biden summit happen. Then how are other APEC nations taking advantage of U.S.-China trade tensions?
Oh, man, are they really trying to do so, right? Because even though the U.S. has very much expressed its lack of desire to decouple from China, it is clearly sending the signals around the world that it wants to partner more closely with nations that have a friendlier political outlook and a friendlier relation. So we're talking about Mexico and Vietnam are the primary beneficiaries of what's called friendshoring, where the U.S. is not only increased its export controls and its tariffs on Chinese goods, but it's also incentivized U.S. companies to the tune of $500 million in the CHIPS Act for investing overseas in more durable supply chains that leave China out, essentially trying to increase the supply chain for autos going into Mexico and into Canada, and increasing the supply chain for semiconductors in Vietnam. And so you've already seen some incentives announced and some announcements come out of a place called, I believe, I have the note here, Amcor Technology announcing a plan for semiconductors in Vietnam. And there are other ones as well that are looking to increase their investment in Vietnam.
Sure. Now, we just talked about APEC outcomes, and let's talk about potential IPEF announcements. That's the Biden administration's first major trade initiative, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and possible political fallout for President Biden.
Yeah, and this reminds me very much of covering the uproar over TPP. If you remember, 2 trade agreements ago, we had the Trans-Pacific Partnership. All of these APEC nations were once again looking to coordinate, not through a framework, but through a free trade agreement and through a free trade zone. That was very much taken down domestically here in the United States. The current U.S. Trade Representative, Catherine Tai, believes that it cost Hillary Clinton the election a couple of presidential elections ago. And the Biden administration, by all accounts, is also feeling similarly pressured by other Democrats. The president's party is essentially saying, if you go forward with the trade pillar of this agreement, we are worried that it's going to cost you the presidential election. So President Biden facing real pressure to basically dump the entire trade pillar of the IPEF. They've already reached a supply chain agreement earlier this year. The other 2 pillars are clean energy, where they could see some outcomes during these sets of talks, and anti-corruption, which is less likely.
Definitely much pressure on his shoulder. All right, Jessica, thanks so much for that coverage, as always.
You bet.